Hello, my name's Grant, I'm from County Funerals, and each week we post videos about the funeral service industry and funeral related products. This week we're going to be talking about a very specific funeral and a very specific grave. The grave of the unknown warrior, the funeral of which took place on the 11th of November 1920 at the West End nave of Westminster Abbey. Now, the tomb of the unknown warrior in Westminster Abbey was the first one of its kind. It's now been replicated in other countries throughout the world, but it can be attributed to one man, the Reverend David Rowton. He was an army chaplain in World War I, and it's said that he had finished his day and he had come by a cross, a simple wooden cross, with the words "unknown British soldier" written on it. So this gave him an idea about bringing an unknown British soldier back to the UK. So he wrote to the Dean, August 1920, Dean Harold Ryle, who then spoke to the then Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, who were aware that almost every single family in the UK had either lost a son, a brother, a father and a loved one. And they rushed the idea through Parliament. So then the selection process began. War dead lying in battlefield graves across France, only one had to be selected. And the really vital thing was that it had to be someone completely at random, because every person needed to subscribe to the fact that that really was their dad, brother or loved one coming back. Because you have to remember that out of all of the war dead, only one was brought back. Parties were sent out to 4 different battlefields. Now some sources say 6, but it's been recorded that this only happened at 4 different British battlefields. Each digging party brought back one deceased, and they placed them in the chapel of the military headquarters at Port Saul. This was nothing more than a tin shed at the time. The bodies were laid out and draped with a Union Jack. 4 bodies were left into this corrugated iron chapel under armed guard, and at midnight the head of the British military forces came, walked around each body, and then placed a wreath on top of one body, completely at random. Some stories recall that he walked around 3 times, and when he come across one he just knew, and he placed the roses on the wreath of roses and then walked out. You may be wondering why, if they exhumed 4 bodies, did they only bring one back? And in fact, why did they only bring one back at all? Now you have to remember, in 1915 the decision was made to leave the war dead where they fell and in battlefield graveyards. There was over 1 million Empire dead, and if you can imagine that, 1 million coffins choking up the ports and railways. Not to mention, how do we identify these people? There'll be warehouses where you'd have to go look for your loved one amongst all the decaying corpses. It was just an impossible task. So the decision was made to leave them where they fell. So after the body had been chosen, 2 officers placed that body inside a simple wooden coffin. The other 3 bodies were then reburied. A coffin from England to meet them at the dock. The coffin was made from 2-inch thick wood from the gardens at Hampton Court Palace. It was lined with zinc, and it had cast iron metal rims that go all the way around the coffin. In those cast iron rims there was a Crusader sword placed from the collection at the Tower of London. Over the coffin there was a Union Jack that used to cover the altar at the western front from the battlefields of World War I. The body was piped aboard HMS Vernon with all the trappings of the Admiralty. The troops and servicemen stood visual over the body as it made its crossing to Dover. Once at Dover, the body was placed onto a train which took it into Victoria Station in London. So on the morning of the 11th of November in 1920, the body of the unknown warrior started its journey, 3-mile procession from Victoria to Westminster Abbey. Hundreds, thousands of people turned out for the procession, many of which are veterans, just to say their final goodbyes and just to respect all those war dead. The procession brought London to a standstill. As the procession made its way through London, King George V placed a wreath of red roses on top of the coffin and unveiled the cenotaph, a new memorial to celebrate the glorious dead of the war. This was done to coincide with the funeral of the unknown warrior. The body arrived at Westminster Abbey. The King, the Prime Minister, the Dean was all in attendance, as was 2,000 other people. But unlike many events at Westminster Abbey, the 2,000 people that were there were not the great and the good of society. They were the families of people that had loved ones lost at war. A burial service took place in the Abbey. The service concluded. and the burial commenced. The body was placed into the grave, and the grave was filled with sacks of earth brought over from the battlefields of France. A silk pall was then placed over the grave, and people were allowed to come and pay their respects. Thousands upon thousands of people filed past to lay flowers and lay wreaths. Wreaths had been brought from France as well, on the HMS Vernon, were also placed. As night fell and the abbey had to close, one of the cloisters looked back and said that silence fell upon the abbey, except for 4 guards of honour, stood straight with their head bows, and the whole abbey was lit up by just 4 candles. The following day, a stone was placed on the grave with the inscription, "A British warrior who fell in the Great War 1914 to 1918 for king and country, greater love hath no man than this." A year later, on the 11th of November 1921, a black marble stone was unveiled. The marble had come from Belgium, and the inscription reads like this. "Beneath this stone rests the body of a British warrior, unknown by name or rank, brought from France to lie among the most illustrious of the land, and buried here on Armistice Day, the 11th of November 1920. In the presence of His Majesty King George V, his ministers of state and chiefs of his forces, and a vast concourse of the nation that commemorated the many multitudes who during the Great War of 1914 to 1918 give the most that a man can give, life itself, for God, for king and country, for loved ones, home and empire, for the sacred cause of justice and freedom of the world, they buried him among the kings, because he had done good towards God and towards his house." Ever since then, the tomb of the unknown warrior has never been walked on in Westminster Abbey, and it's the only grave never to be walked on. As if you've been in there, there is a staggering 3,300 people entombed in Westminster Abbey. So many of the graves are walked on. Another interesting fact, that when Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon married the future King George VI on the 26th of April 1923, she laid her bridal bouquet on the tomb on the way into the Abbey as a tribute to her brother Fergus, who had died in the battles. Later, all royal princesses that get married in the Abbey have left their wedding bouquet on the tomb of the unknown warrior the day after the wedding. Before she died in 2002, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mum, the same Elizabeth who first laid her wedding bouquet at the tomb, expressed the wishes for her wreath to be placed on the tomb of the unknown warrior. Her daughter, Queen Elizabeth II, laid her funeral wreath the day after the funeral. There you go, the story of the unknown warrior. I don't know if you liked it, I hope you did. If you do, hit like. You could always share and subscribe. If you'd like to see more videos about famous funerals, famous graves, or a little bit more history involved, do let us know. I don't mind doing them. Otherwise, we'll go back to our question and answers. Thanks a lot. See you soon. Remember...